"Move, you old hag!" The words sliced through the calm murmur of the diner like a razor. Dorothy Washington doesn't even have time to rise before a hand, smooth, manicured, and dripping with arrogance, strikes her across the cheek. The sound is sharp, almost too loud for such a small place. Her porcelain coffee cup flies, crashes against the tiled floor, and shatters into a spray of brown and white. Every conversation halts. Forks freeze midair. Phones tilt upward, ready to capture the scene. The man towering over her adjusts his tailored jacket, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of dominance. "Maybe next time, keep your wrinkled hands off my table," he says, loud enough for everyone to hear. Dorothy doesn't speak. Her palm rises slowly to her face, fingers brushing the burning imprint of his hand. But there are no tears, only composure. An unsettling, quiet dignity that makes even the boldest onlookers shift in their seats. The man, Richard Sterling, feels it. That flicker of something he can't quite name. For a split second, he's the one who feels small. Then pride kicks back in. He scoffs, turns away, and tosses a wad of bills on the counter as if money could erase what he's done. Dorothy simply looks at him, steady, unbroken. And something in that calm, unreadable stare tells the whole diner that this story isn't over, because Dorothy Washington isn't just any elderly woman grabbing breakfast at Rosie's Cafe, and the man who just struck her has no idea what kind of storm he's just invited into his life. That morning had started like any other for Dorothy. 6:30 sharp, and she rose from her bed. The soft light of dawn filtering through the lace curtains she'd sewn decades ago. Her small apartment on the city's east side was immaculate, a reflection of a lifetime built on discipline, patience, and pride. Books lined the shelves, history, poetry, and faith. Family photos framed in polished oak told the story of generations who had worked too hard to ever hang their heads. One photo, centered above the fireplace, drew the eye more than the rest. Dorothy and her son, Vincent Washington, standing side by side at a charity gala. Vincent's crisp black suit, his calm authority, and the discreet lapel pin of a federal seal said everything words didn't need to. Dorothy smiled every time she passed it. She never bragged, never told the neighbors what her son really did, that he wasn't just a businessman, but a federal leader whose name carried weight in Washington, D.C. corridors most people never saw. To her friends, she simply said, "Vincent works in public service," and left it at that. At exactly 8 o'clock, the phone rang. "Morning, Ma," came that warm, confident voice she loved. "You sleep okay?" "Like a baby, sweetheart." "You eating, right? You sound tired," Vincent chuckled. "That's the job talking." "Long week ahead. What's on your schedule?" "Lunch with Helen. Rosie's as usual." "You know how she gets if I cancel?" He smiled. "Then I won't keep you long. Just wanted to hear your voice." It was the kind of conversation they'd had 1,000 times, the kind that lulls you into thinking nothing in the world could ever go wrong. Neither of them knew that within hours, that peaceful rhythm would shatter. The lunch crowd was mellow that day. Country music hummed low beneath the clatter of plates. Dorothy and her friend Helen always chose the corner booth, close enough to people watch, far enough for quiet talk. Rosie, the owner, waved from behind the counter. "The usual, Miss Washington?" Dorothy nodded with her soft, practiced smile. Black coffee and the chicken pot pie, but before Rosie could even set down the plate, a loud voice cut through the room. "Hey, I said this seat was mine." A tall man in a tailored suit stood over their booth, irritation painted across his face. His watch alone probably cost more than most people's rent. Dorothy, always polite, shifted slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry, young man. We didn't see anyone here," he sneered. "Then maybe you should start looking before you sit down, Grandma." The laughter from his companions, 3 other suited men, was sharp and uncomfortable. Helen lowered her gaze. Dorothy didn't. She simply said, "I was raised to respect my elders, son. You should try it sometime." That was when he slapped her. It wasn't about the seat. It wasn't even about the moment. It was about ego, power, and the ugly comfort some men feel when they think they can get away with cruelty. The diner erupted after that. Rosie came rushing out from behind the counter shouting, "Sir!" You need to leave right now! Helen sobbed quietly, trembling beside Dorothy. Someone in the corner said, I got that on video. But Dorothy didn't react. She just stood, adjusted her cardigan, and placed a few bills on the table. Rosie, I'll pay for the cup I broke, she said softly. Her dignity silenced the room more than the slap ever had. As she walked out, the man, Richard Sterling, called after her, You should thank me for teaching you manners. Dorothy paused at the door, turned, and said, just loud enough for him to hear, Oh, I'll thank you. Sooner than you think. Then she left. By the time Vincent Washington's phone buzzed later that afternoon, the video had already gone viral. The subject line in the message read, Your mother? The footage showed everything, the slap, the coffee shattering, Dorothy's silence. Vincent didn't blink as he watched. Didn't breathe for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Get me everything you can on a Richard Sterling, he said to his assistant. The name rings a bell, she replied nervously. It should, Vincent said. He's been on our watch list for months. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Because Richard Sterling hadn't just attacked a woman. He'd attacked the mother of the man leading the FBI's organized crime task force, the one investigating Sterling's shadow network of bribes and corporate laundering. And from that moment forward, every breath Sterling took was already borrowed time. By morning, the video had 1 million views. It started on a small community page. Someone captioned it, She didn't deserve this. Within hours, it spread everywhere. Facebook groups, news clips, morning talk shows. The image of a frail black woman being struck across. The face by a wealthy man in a navy suit burned into public consciousness. Like a scar, some people argued about what really happened. Others didn't need context. They saw cruelty plain as day. And in every comment thread, one question echoed, Who is she? Vincent Washington didn't answer his phone that morning. He sat in his D.C. office, blinds drawn, the faint hum of the city below. The video played again and again on his screen. He didn't watch the slap anymore. He studied everything else. The way his mother stayed composed. The look on the man's face after he hit her. The glint of panic behind his arrogance. Vincent's jaw tightened. Arrogant, stupid, and careless, he murmured. His deputy, Agent Morales, hovered by the doorway. Sir, we've confirmed it. The man in the video is Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. Defense contractor, multiple federal bids pending. We've been tracking his offshore accounts for months. Vincent nodded slowly. He'd spent his career catching men like Sterling, men who believed money made them untouchable. But this time was different. This wasn't just another file. This was personal. Keep the team quiet, Vincent said finally. No leaks. No statements. We do this by the book. My book, Morales frowned. Understood, sir, but... Do you want to recuse yourself? Conflict of interest. Vincent turned his chair, eyes sharp as glass. Morales, if someone slapped your mother, would you recuse yourself? Morales didn't answer. He didn't need to. The diner didn't feel the same anymore. Reporters had already stopped by that morning. They took pictures, asked questions, tried to buy copies of the security footage. Rosie threw them out one by one. Dorothy sat in her usual booth, calm, unbothered, a soft wool coat draped around her shoulders. Her friend Helen sat opposite her, still trembling from the memory. Why'd you come back here, Dorothy? Helen whispered. After what happened? Because running from ugliness gives it power, Dorothy said quietly. And I refuse to live small for another man's sin. The door chimed open. Conversations hushed. Richard Sterling walked in. This time there were no suits with him. No laughter. Just a faint smell of cologne and the brittle confidence of a man whose name had turned radioactive overnight. Rosie stiffened. You need to leave. I'm here to apologize, Sterling said flatly. But even his apology sounded like a statement rehearsed by lawyers. He turned to Dorothy. Miss Washington, my behavior yesterday was unacceptable. I was under stress. Dorothy looked up slowly. Stress doesn't make a man cruel. It just shows what's already inside him. A few people clapped quietly. Sterling's jaw tensed. He looked around, realizing every phone in the diner was aimed at him now. He muttered something and turned for the door. Dorothy's voice stopped him cold. "You ever lose sleep, Mr. Sterling? Ever wake up wondering if you've built your success on somebody else's pain?" He didn't answer. He just left. Helen stared after him. "Dorothy, you shouldn't provoke him." Dorothy smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm not provoking him, dear. I'm reminding him." That evening, Dorothy's phone rang again, but not at the usual time. "Ma," Vincent said softly. "I saw the video." "I figured you would," she replied, her voice calm but tired. "People are sending me all sorts of messages. Reporters, church folks, even that pastor from Georgia who does the TV show." "I'm handling it," Vincent said. "You don't need to worry." "I'm not," Dorothy said. "Just don't let anger guide you. You taught me once that justice isn't revenge." Vincent's voice hardened. "Justice has many faces," Dorothy sighed. "Promise me, Vincent." There was a long silence on the line. "Get some rest, Ma," he said, avoiding the question. "And maybe stay home for a few days." Richard Sterling spent that night at his penthouse suite downtown, staring at his reflection in the black glass of the city skyline. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Board members, PR teams, investors. The company stock had dropped 11% in a single day. He'd faced scandals before. They all blew over eventually. Money fixed things. Lawyers fixed things. That's what power was for. He poured himself another drink and scrolled through headlines. CEO assaults elderly woman in viral video. Corporate giant faces public fury. Sterling Dynamics in freefall. His phone buzzed again. "Private number," he answered with a growl. "Who is this?" A calm voice replied. "Mr. Sterling, this is Special Agent Vincent Washington, FBI Organized Crime Division." Sterling froze. Vincent continued, tone precise and measured. "We've been reviewing some of your company's contracts, and a few irregularities came to our attention. Offshore accounts, falsified invoices. You might want to keep your schedule open in the coming weeks." Sterling's pulse spiked. You can't intimidate me." "I have lawyers." "I'm not calling to intimidate you, Mr. Sterling. I'm calling to inform you. Actions have consequences. You should get some rest." Click. Sterling stood motionless, phone trembling in his hand. He didn't know yet that the real storm had already begun, quiet, methodical, and coming for everything he built. Because Vincent Washington didn't need to threaten. He just needed the truth to come out. By the next day, small things began to happen. A major investor pulled out of Sterling Dynamics. A federal audit request appeared on his desk. An employee whistleblower filed a complaint about unethical disposal of defense materials. Each strike seemed random until Sterling realized the pattern. Someone was dismantling his empire one piece at a time. He slammed his fist on the desk. "Who's doing this?" But there was no answer because the person orchestrating it all wasn't outside the system. He was the system. Dorothy sat by her window that night, sipping tea. Through the curtains, city lights flickered, like tiny confessions in the dark. She whispered to herself, "Lord, whatever my son's doing, guide his hands." Washington didn't move fast. He moved quietly. And quiet was always deadlier. By dawn, an encrypted directive left his desk at the bureau. It contained no names, no context, just a project tag, Operation Glasshouse. The orders were clear. Freeze every Sterling Dynamics transaction pending audit. Trace all overseas shell accounts. Pull the files from the Department of Defense Procurement Division, starting with fiscal year 2017. Within hours, the digital spiders began to crawl. Hidden accounts flickered on screens in silence. False invoices, duplicate vendors. Payments routed through Luxembourg, then to a consulting firm in the Caymans. It was enough to raise suspicion, not yet enough to destroy. Vincent knew that timing mattered. Justice wasn't just about what you revealed, it was when. Dorothy stayed home, as her son asked. But her home had never been quiet before, and the silence now carried weight. She reread old letters from Vincent's childhood. His first day of academy training. His graduation from Quantico, the nights he called to tell her, "Ma, I'm fine," even when he wasn't. She always knew his world was dangerous, but now she feared a different kind of danger, one that didn't come from bullets or bombs, but from pride. When Helen visited that afternoon, Dorothy smiled faintly. "You look tired," Helen said. "Worry makes you look older than age ever will," Dorothy replied softly. "Worry about your boy?" "No," Dorothy said. "I'm praying about him." Richard Sterling hadn't slept in 2 days. He barked orders into his phone, his voice hoarse. "Find out who's behind this audit. Call our legal team. I want every account sanitized." But one of his vice presidents, a man named Dale Harland, hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should cooperate. It's federal." "If they already know," Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't ever finish that sentence." Dale nodded and walked out, but his expression had changed. By that evening, Dale Harlan became the Bureau's first informant. He sent a quiet email to a federal contact. Subject line, "You're looking for the wrong file." That contact was Agent Morales. And within an hour, Vincent Washington had access to a classified server Sterling thought no one could trace. The office lights were low that night when Morales entered Vincent's office. "Holding a small drive. We got the recordings," he said. "Meetings between Sterling and several contractors. You'll want to hear this." They listened. Static first, then a smooth, arrogant voice, unmistakably Sterling's. "Don't worry about the safety reports. They don't check those. Just reword the tests. If anything blows up, we'll bury it." Vincent didn't flinch, didn't breathe. Morales watched him carefully. "Sir, that's enough to bury him for life." Vincent's eyes stayed cold. "Not yet. We don't arrest men like Sterling. We unravel them." The next morning, Sterling Dynamics' largest defense contract was temporarily suspended pending compliance verification. The company's stock plunged again. Board members demanded an emergency meeting. Sterling stormed into the conference room, his composure gone. "Someone's running a smear campaign," he growled. "We fight back." But his legal counsel, a calm woman named Leah Rhodes, said softly, "You can't fight what's true, Richard." "You can only delay it," he glared at her. "Are you quitting?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm cooperating." For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling realized what it felt like to stand alone. That same afternoon, a black SUV stopped outside Dorothy Washington's building. Vincent stepped out, coat collar turned against the wind. He knocked softly. "Ma," he said when she opened the door, "I just wanted to check in." She smiled, though her eyes were tired. "Come sit, baby. You look like the weight of the world's on your shoulders." Vincent sat, hands clasped. "I'm close," he said quietly. "To the man who hurt you. To what he's hiding." Dorothy studied him. "And when you find it?" "I'll bring it all down." Dorothy shook her head gently. "Don't let vengeance wear your badge, Vincent." He looked away, but she reached out, touching his hand. "Justice is light," she said softly. "But when you carry hate, you turn into the darkness you're trying to defeat." Vincent swallowed hard. "You raised a fighter, Ma." "I raised a protector," she corrected. "Don't forget the difference." That night, Sterling's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered warily. "Who is this?" A distorted voice replied, "You think you're being hunted by enemies, Richard? You're not. You're being dismantled by truth." The line went dead. Sterling's hand shook. For the first time, he wondered if the man he slapped wasn't the victim, but the beginning of his reckoning. The wind outside Sterling Tower howled like a warning that morning, rattling the mirrored windows of the 20-story building where Richard Sterling's empire was beginning to fracture. Inside, the once bustling lobby was half empty. Security guards stood uneasy by the doors, whispering among themselves. The receptionist pretended to type, her eyes flicking nervously to the glass elevators every time one opened, because everyone knew. Something was happening, something they couldn't name, but everyone could feel. In his top-floor office, Richard Sterling paced like a man trapped in his own reflection. Stacks of papers littered the table. Phone lines blinked, unanswered. He barked orders into the air, but even his own staff no longer rushed to obey. When power starts to slip, it doesn't fall all at once. It leaks, quietly, through cracks in fear and loyalty. He turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. All those years building connections, buying favors, controlling headlines. And now one incident in a diner, one slap, had begun to pull a lifetime of deceit into daylight. His jaw tightened. "This isn't over," he muttered to his reflection. "It can't be." Across town, in a secure conference room at the Bureau's Denver field office, Vincent Washington stood before a digital board filled with faces, arrows, and transaction lines. He looked at his team, 4 of his most trusted agents, including Morales. "This isn't just about a single assault," Vincent began, voice steady. "Sterling Dynamics has been manipulating defense contracts, laundering taxpayer money through foreign intermediaries, and paying off local inspectors." That slap at Rosie's wasn't arrogance, it was exposure. He thought he was untouchable. He pointed to a glowing red line connecting Sterling's company to GlobeSec Industries, a government subcontractor. "This transfer right here, it's the key. If we can tie these payments to the dummy accounts we traced in Zurich, we've got probable cause for a full seizure." Agent Morales frowned. "That's going to blow his operation sky high." Vincent's eyes darkened. Good. Let him choke on the dust of his own empire. At 3:15 that afternoon, Dorothy's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. The number was blocked. When she finally did, the voice on the other end froze her blood. "Mrs. Washington, Richard Sterling." Her grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "Your son works for a very noisy agency." "Mrs. Washington, I have friends in places you wouldn't imagine." She said nothing. "I didn't call to argue," Sterling continued, his voice strained, almost desperate. "I just wanted you to understand something. I'm not your enemy. Your son. He's stepping into something bigger than you realize. There are men behind me who don't like being exposed." Dorothy's tone stayed calm. "You mean men like yourself?" Sterling exhaled sharply. "I made a mistake that day. I lost my temper. I shouldn't have touched you." "But this," his voice cracked, "this isn't about us anymore. Tell your son to back off before it's too late." Dorothy's voice softened, but her words cut clean. "You don't get to warn me, Mr. Sterling. You hurt a woman who's been through more storms than you can imagine." "I'll pray for you, but I won't fear you." Then she hung up. By evening, headlines began to flood social media. Whistleblower alleges Sterling Dynamics overbilled defense. Department by $78 million. Federal investigation expands into Sterling's offshore accounts. Richard Sterling's phone buzzed with panic from every corner of his world. His PR director, his lawyer, even old friends in Congress, all asking the same question. "What did you do?" Sterling slammed his fist on the desk, roaring, "Somebody's leaking classified information!" But in truth, it wasn't a leak. It was Vincent. He had authorized a controlled disclosure, a legal breadcrumb trail designed to flush Sterling into the open. Now, as public pressure mounted, Sterling would make the one mistake Vincent needed him to. He'd panic. That night, Vincent sat alone in his apartment overlooking the city lights. His badge lay on the coffee table, glinting faintly. He played Dorothy's voicemail, the one she left earlier. Her voice was steady but weary. "Vincent, you're walking in fire. Remember who you are, baby. Don't fight darkness by becoming it." He exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. The truth was, he didn't know anymore where justice ended and revenge began. Then Morales entered, holding a file. "Sir, we got something new. Sterling's trying to move funds offshore. He's spooked." Vincent stood. "Then it's working. Keep eyes on every account." Morales hesitated. "You sure you're okay?" "You haven't gone home in 3 days." Vincent smiled faintly. "I'll rest when he's done answering for what he did." The next morning, Sterling arrived at his office to find every entrance swarmed with reporters. "Mr. Sterling, do you deny involvement in the fraudulent contract schemes? Sir, are you aware of an FBI operation targeting your company?" "Mr. Sterling, is it true you physically assaulted a retired educator last week?" That last question hit harder than any punch. Sterling froze mid-step, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. He looked around, and for the first time he realized something he had never believed possible. No one was afraid of him anymore. He shoved past the crowd, shouting, "No comment!" Inside, his assistant whispered, "Sir, the board's requesting your resignation." Sterling turned pale. "My what?" Effective immediately, sir. He stared blankly at the papers on his desk, hands trembling. A week ago, he owned this city. Now, even his shadow was shrinking. That night, Dorothy sat by her window, a soft gospel tune playing on the radio. The world was unraveling for the man who hurt her, yet she felt no satisfaction. Only a quiet sorrow that arrogance always ends the same way. Her phone vibrated. Vincent's message appeared, almost over. "Stay home tomorrow. Love you." She smiled faintly, whispering a prayer. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. And somewhere downtown, Richard Sterling was about to make his final mistake. Morning broke gray over the city, the kind of dull, heavy light that makes everything look tired. In the distance, the news choppers circled Sterling Tower, the way vultures circle something that's already gone cold. Richard Sterling hadn't slept. His once impeccable suit hung loose, his hair disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot from hours of pacing the same office floor. He had spent all night making calls, old friends, lawyers, politicians, but every line ended the same. "I'm sorry, Richard, but there's nothing I can do. You understand, right? I have to protect my name. It's best you lay low for a while." They all said, a while, but he knew what it really meant. Forever. By noon, the board of directors gathered without him. Men and women he had once hand-picked now sat at the long mahogany table, whispering in tones of quiet urgency. At the head sat Margaret Lee, once his most loyal advisor. "We have no choice," she said, sliding a document forward. "If we don't cut him loose, Sterling Dynamics collapses within the week." "But what about loyalty?" one executive muttered. Margaret's gaze hardened. "Loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Survival does." The motion passed in less than 10 minutes. The vote was unanimous. Richard Sterling was officially removed as CEO of the company that bore his name. When Richard arrived, security guards were already at the door. "Sir, we've been instructed to escort you out." He stared at them. Two young men in black uniforms, faces blank, avoiding eye contact. He could have yelled, threatened, reminded them who he was. But for the first time in his life, the words didn't come. He stepped inside his office one last time. The blinds swayed slightly in the air conditioning. His awards gleamed on the shelves. His nameplate still shone on the desk. He picked it up slowly, turning it over in his hand. Richard Sterling, President and CEO. The letters looked smaller now, almost fragile. He set it down and walked out, without another word. Across town, Vincent's team assembled in the command van outside Sterling Tower. Morales leaned over the monitors. "Wire transfers confirmed. He's moving assets through a shell company registered in Panama. The minute he leaves that building, we have jurisdiction." Vincent adjusted his earpiece. "No media circus this time." "We do it clean." His eyes were steady, but inside his pulse was pounding. This wasn't just another arrest. It was personal. Not because Sterling had insulted his mother, but because of the thousands of people like her that men like Sterling walked over daily. "Target moving," Morales announced. "He's heading to the garage," Vincent nodded. "Let's bring him home." Sterling's black Mercedes pulled out from the underground parking lot, moving fast. He wasn't running from justice, not yet. He was running from humiliation, the thing he feared most. He dialed a number on his encrypted phone. "Alexei, the jet ready?" A thick Russian accent replied, "Da, but you need authorization code for clearance." 15 minutes delay." 15 minutes? Sterling snapped. "I don't have 15 minutes. As he hung up, his rearview mirror filled with flashing red and blue lights. The Bureau's unmarked SUVs closed in fast. Sterling cursed under his breath, pressing the pedal to the floor. The Mercedes roared down the ramp toward the interstate, weaving through midday traffic. But no matter how fast he went, he couldn't outrun what was already waiting for him. At the next intersection, a police barricade glimmered in the sun. Vincent's SUV screeched to a halt behind him. "Richard Sterling," Vincent shouted, stepping out with his badge raised. "Federal warrant. Exit the vehicle." Sterling's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Sweat ran down his temples. He looked left. Construction trucks. Right, a concrete divider. Nowhere to go. He slammed his hands against the wheel in rage. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling had no one to command, no one to buy, no one to blame. He stepped out slowly. The air was still. Sterling stood face to face with Vincent, the man whose mother he had humiliated. For a long, silent moment, neither spoke. Then Sterling said, voice trembling, "You think this makes you righteous? You think your badge means you're better than me?" Vincent didn't answer. He just looked at him, long and hard. "You know what your problem is?" Sterling continued, his voice rising. "You people don't understand power. You mistake it for cruelty because you've never had it." Vincent took a step forward, eyes cold but calm. "And you mistake cruelty for control because you've never known integrity." Sterling flinched, but Vincent's voice stayed steady. "You could have built something that mattered. You could have left behind more than your name on a building, but you chose arrogance. And now you get to live with it." He turned to the agents. "Read him his rights." Sterling's voice cracked as they took his wrists. "You'll regret this, Washington." "They all will. I'll—" The words broke off as the cuffs clicked shut. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling's voice didn't echo. That night, every major network carried the footage. Billionaire CEO arrested in federal fraud scandal. FBI agent Vincent Washington leads Operation Sterling. At Rosie's Diner, the TV flickered above the counter as regulars gathered around, half in disbelief, half in quiet pride. Rosie herself smiled softly. "Your mama raised one fine man, Dorothy." Dorothy Washington sat at her usual booth, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, eyes glistening with gratitude. She didn't say much, just looked up at the screen, at her son standing tall in that dark suit, and whispered, "Justice don't need revenge. It just needs proof." Later, as the city settled into silence, Vincent stood outside his mother's house. The same wind that had carried her humiliation a week ago now brushed softly through the porch curtains. Dorothy opened the door before he could knock. For a moment, they just looked at each other, no words needed. Finally, she said, "You okay, baby?" Vincent smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's over." Dorothy reached up, gently touching his cheek. "No, son. It's just beginning. The world's still full of men like him. You just keep doing your part, one truth at a time." They hugged under the porch light, and somewhere behind them, inside the house, the radio played an old gospel song about grace. Not the kind you earn, but the kind you find when you finally let go. 3 days after the arrest, the city felt different, quieter, like it was holding its breath after a long, loud argument. The news cycle had shifted from outrage to analysis, from Sterling's crimes to Vincent's composure. Pundits debated integrity. Commentators praised restraint. But in one small diner at the corner of Maple and 3rd, the story wasn't about headlines, it was about healing. Dorothy Washington stepped through Rosie's door just as she had 100 mornings before. This time, the bell over the door rang differently, not as a warning, but a welcome. Heads turned. Smiles appeared. People she'd known for years stood to greet her, their gestures small but genuine, a hand over a heart. A nod of respect, a quiet "Good morning, Mrs. Washington." Rosie came from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "You sure you're ready to be out, Dorothy?" Dorothy chuckled softly. "Oh, honey, if I stayed home every time someone acted a fool, I'd never see daylight." The diner laughed, a warm, collective sound that broke whatever was left of the tension that had hung there all week. Dorothy made her way to her booth, sat down, and looked out the window at the rising sun. Same table, same view, but something deep within her had shifted. She wasn't thinking about the slap anymore. She was thinking about what came after. Across the diner, a young man nervously approached her table. He couldn't have been more than 25, a construction worker by the look of his boots and the grease on his hands. "Ma'am," he began, voice low, "I was here that day. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Dorothy looked up. "Sorry? For what, dear?" I didn't do anything. I just sat there. I saw what he did and I froze. I've been thinking about that all week." She smiled gently. You know, son, sometimes silence ain't cowardice. Sometimes it's confusion. You saw something ugly and you didn't know what to do. The important thing is, you do better next time. The young man nodded, his eyes wet. I will, ma'am. I promise. Dorothy reached across the table and patted his hand. That's all any of us can do. Across town, Vincent Washington sat in his office at the bureau. The morning light slanted through the blinds, streaking across the folders stacked on his desk. The Sterling case had exploded wider than he'd planned. Offshore accounts, bribed regulators, silent partners. It wasn't just one bad man. It was a web. Morales entered with a cup of coffee. You know, I figured you'd be home by now. Vincent smiled faintly. You ever notice how corruption doesn't take weekends off? Morales shrugged. Maybe, but you should. You've done enough to shake half this city. Vincent leaned back in his chair. That's the thing, Morales. Justice doesn't end with one arrest. It ends when people stop thinking they can get away with it. Morales raised an eyebrow. You sound like your mother, Vincent chuckled. That's the best compliment I've gotten all week. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling sat in a detention center just outside the city. Gone were the suits, the power, the entourage. He wore gray now, the color of regret. His lawyer had stopped returning calls. His wife had left the country. And for the first time in his life, there was no one left to impress. He sat in the visitation room, staring at the reflection in the glass, the deep lines of pride and disbelief etched into his face. A reporter's voice came faintly from a nearby TV. Former CEO Richard Sterling faces 27 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Sources say his company will be placed under federal receivership. Sterling turned away. The world had moved on, and he was no longer part of it. But sometimes the worst punishment isn't prison. It's being forgotten by the world that once obeyed you. 2 weeks later, the mayor held a press conference at City Hall. Vincent Washington stood beside his mother, both dressed in quiet dignity. Flashbulbs went off as the mayor spoke into the microphones. Today, we recognize Agent Vincent Washington for his integrity, courage, and service to our community. But we also recognize something greater, the strength that begins at home. Mrs. Dorothy Washington, this city owes you a debt of gratitude. The applause was loud. But Dorothy just smiled modestly, leaning toward the microphone. Thank you, Mayor. I raised my boy to know the difference between what's easy and what's right. If this city remembers that, we'll all be just fine. The crowd cheered. Reporters took notes. And for a fleeting moment, mother and son stood side by side, symbols not of revenge, but of resilience. After the ceremony, Vincent drove his mother home. The city lights blurred past the window, glowing like embers. Dorothy looked out, her voice soft. You know, Vincent, your daddy would have been proud. Vincent glanced over. I hope so. He would, she said, smiling. He always said you'd do something that mattered. They pulled into her driveway. The porch light flickered. Old wiring she refused to let anyone replace. Dorothy turned to her son. You gonna come in for supper? Vincent smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Later that evening, the same kitchen that once echoed with laughter and jazz hummed softly as Dorothy set the table. Vincent poured the sweet tea. The smell of baked chicken filled the air. It was ordinary, beautifully, deliberately ordinary. Dorothy sat down, folded her hands, and bowed her head. Lord, she said softly, thank you for the truth, for mercy, and for second chances, even for the ones who don't deserve them. Vincent opened his eyes and smiled. The world outside could argue about power, justice, and politics. But inside that small kitchen, peace had finally returned. Outside, the night was still. A single newspaper lay on the porch, its headline faintly visible under the streetlight. Truth wins out. Dorothy reached for it, smiled, and brought it inside. The wind carried her laughter through the curtains, the sound of a woman who had weathered storms and still found the grace to stand tall, because dignity once earned never fades. It just waits, quietly, for the world to catch up. The headlines had faded, but the echoes hadn't. Weeks passed since Richard Sterling's fall, yet the city still whispered his name like a cautionary tale. What once symbolized prestige now represented arrogance exposed, a reminder that cruelty, no matter how casual, always leaves fingerprints. But the world doesn't stay still after justice. It watches, learns, changes in small human ways, and in this new quiet, Dorothy Washington's dignity had become something more powerful than outrage. It had become example. At a coffee shop across town, two young women sat scrolling through their phones. One stopped mid-scroll, showing a video paused on Dorothy's calm face from the diner incident. "She didn't even hit back," said one, shaking her head. "If that was me," her friend interrupted, eyes still on the screen. "That's why it worked. She didn't need to." "You can't humiliate Grace," the first girl nodded slowly. "You think she knows what she started?" The second smiled faintly. "Oh, I think she's known her whole life." At the Bureau, Vincent Washington's reputation had changed overnight. Not because of the arrests, but because of how he handled them. Controlled, surgical, righteous. The director had called him in personally. "Washington," he'd said, "we're forming a special task force, internal integrity, cross-agency. We want you to lead it." Vincent didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," he said simply. But as he walked out of that meeting, the weight of the decision settled in. Power was a dangerous thing. He'd just seen how easily it could turn men into monsters. So he made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't build an empire. He'd build a mirror, one that forced people to face themselves. Back home, Dorothy had returned to volunteering at the local youth center, teaching reading and public speaking to teenagers who needed guidance more than grammar. That Tuesday, she wrote a word on the chalkboard in neat, confident strokes. Integrity. A hand went up in the back. "Miss Washington, what's that mean again?" Dorothy turned, smiling. "It means doing right when no one's clapping for you, child." The kids laughed softly, but one boy, a tall, quiet one, raised his hand again. "What if doing right costs you?" She paused, then answered gently. "Then it's proof it's worth something." For a moment, the classroom fell silent, and in that stillness, even the air seemed to listen. 3 counties away, Richard Sterling sat in a federal detention center, staring at the visitors list taped to his cell door. No names, no family, no lawyers, just a note from the Bureau. All appeals denied. Then one morning, the guard appeared. "You've got a visitor," Sterling frowned. "Who?" "Name's Vincent Washington." His heart sank. The two men sat across from each other, glass between them. Vincent didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the man who had humiliated his mother. Calm, composed, unreadable. "You wanted to see me," Sterling muttered. "Why?" Vincent leaned forward. "Because men like you think consequences end at arrest." "I came to tell you they don't," Sterling scowled. "You think you're better than me?" Vincent's eyes hardened. "No, I think I listened to the woman you slapped. That's the difference." For the first time, Sterling looked away. He'd faced judges, reporters, and federal agents, but not shame. Not like this. Vincent stood to leave. "You should think about that." "You've got plenty of time." That Sunday, the small church on Ashbury Street overflowed. Dorothy hadn't planned to speak, but when Pastor Lewis asked her to say a few words, she rose slowly, steady as ever. "I'm not here to talk about what happened to me," she began. "I'm here to talk about what didn't happen." The room leaned in. No one pulled a gun. No one shouted hate back. And yet justice found its way. That's the kind of power we forget we have. The kind that doesn't need to scream. A murmur of "Amen" echoed through the pews. She continued softly. "Sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He gives you the spine to stand in the rain." The applause rose, not loud, but heartfelt. The sound of people recognizing truth when they hear it. Late one night, Vincent sat alone in his office reviewing reports. Buried in one of them was a name, a prominent city developer who'd made illegal donations years ago. The man was powerful, respected, and one of Vincent's mentors. If he turned this file over, it could destroy a man who'd once helped him get his start. If he didn't, it would destroy everything his mother believed about him. He stared at the report for a long time. Then, with a slow exhale, he reached for the phone. Internal Affairs, he said evenly. I need to submit a conflict disclosure. Effective immediately. Integrity, he thought. Doing right when no one's clapping. Later that night, Dorothy sat on her porch, knitting quietly as the cicadas hummed. Vincent arrived, tired but peaceful. How was your day, sweetheart? She asked. Complicated, he said. Good kind of complicated? He smiled. The honest kind, Dorothy nodded. That's the only kind that lasts. She handed him a glass of lemonade. You know, when your father and I first moved here, people said we'd never fit in. But kindness has a funny way of proving folks wrong. Vincent looked out over the street. You really think people can change? Dorothy's needles paused. Maybe not all at once. But one heart at a time? Absolutely. Across the city, quiet changes began to appear. A police sergeant, known for arrogance, suddenly volunteered at youth outreach. A businessman canceled a luxury project to fund local scholarships. And the diner where it all began put up a new sign above the counter, Respect is served here. Every customer who walked in noticed it. Some smiled. Some paused. But everyone understood. By month's end, the city had moved on. News cycles spun new stories. But for those who had seen what happened, truly seen it, something had settled deep in their bones. A realization that dignity can disarm cruelty. That truth once spoken never goes silent, and that sometimes the smallest act, a woman refusing to bow her head, can echo louder than any headline. The fire had gone out of the headlines, but it still burned in the halls of power. Vincent Washington had become a symbol, the man who brought down corruption, the son who defended his mother's dignity. But symbols, he was learning, attract shadows. In the months after the arrests, invitations flooded in, dinners, fundraisers, speeches. Senators shook his hand. Governors quoted his words. Some meant it. Most didn't. They didn't want Vincent the man. They wanted Vincent the story, a clean headline to polish their own names. It was a Thursday afternoon when it came. Vincent sat in his office overlooking the city, reviewing task force reports. The knock on the door was light but confident. Come in, he said. A man in his 50s entered. Silver hair, tailored suit, that effortless Washington charm. Director Washington, he began smoothly. I'm Daniel Merrick, senior advisor to the Secretary of Homeland Security. Vincent gestured for him to sit. What can I do for you, Mr. Merrick? Merrick smiled the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's what we can do for each other. You've built something powerful. Respect, trust, moral authority. The department believes it's time for you to use it where it matters most. Vincent waited. Merrick leaned forward. There's a Senate seat opening next term. We'd like to back you. Resources, endorsements, the full machine. All you'd have to do is play ball. Play ball, Vincent repeated quietly. Meaning? Meaning stay out of certain investigations. Choose your priorities wisely. Help us help you. For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the skyline. The same city his mother had raised him to protect, not rule. You know what my mother told me once, Mr. Merrick? Merrick smirked. I imagine she's full of wisdom. She said some deals are just slow poison. They don't kill you right away. They just make you forget who you were. He turned back, eyes sharp as glass. I'm not for sale. Merrick's smirk faltered. That's a mistake. No, Vincent said, voice like steel. It's a legacy. Merrick rose, mask cracking just slightly. Be careful, Director. Idealists tend to make powerful enemies. Vincent's answer was simple. Then I'll die with my soul intact. That evening, Vincent stopped by his mother's home, a habit he never abandoned no matter how high he climbed. The air smelled faintly of lavender and fresh bread. Dorothy sat by the window, knitting a new scarf for the neighbor's baby. You've got that storm face again, she said without looking up. Vincent smiled tiredly. How do you always know? A mother's job, she said, setting her yarn down. Who upset you this time? He told her everything. The offer, the threats, the temptation of power disguised as patriotism. When he finished, she simply said, I'm proud of you. For turning down a Senate seat? For recognizing the trap before it shut? She poured him tea, her movements slow and sure. Power's a funny thing, baby. It can make you believe you're still serving others when you're really just feeding yourself. He sipped, thoughtful. What if they come after me, Ma? Dorothy's eyes softened. Then you'll stand tall, just like you did when that man hit me. Evil never changes its shape. It just wears new suits. 2 weeks later, the first warning arrived. A black SUV followed Vincent's car for 6 blocks before vanishing. The next morning, a reporter called, anonymously, hinting at a personal scandal that didn't exist. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photo of Vincent leaving a community center. And a note. Stay in your lane, Agent Washington. He stared at it for a long time, feeling the pulse in his jaw. They wanted fear. They wanted reaction. They'd get neither. He burned the note in his sink, watching the ashes curl. That night he called an old friend, Special Agent Rossi. You were right, he said. It's not over. Then we dig again, Rossi replied. Quietly this time. Meanwhile, in the neighborhoods that once feared men like Sterling, a quiet revolution had begun. Small businesses reopened under fairer contracts. Local officers attended Dorothy's integrity evenings at the church, where she hosted open discussions on leadership and accountability. People came because they trusted her, not the badge, not the system, but her. One evening, a young police recruit stood up and said, Miss Washington, you think folks like me can really change things from the inside? Dorothy looked at him over her glasses. Son, every system's just a collection of people. Change the people, you change the system. Applause filled the hall. In that moment, the old woman who'd once been slapped in a diner became the city's moral compass. The following month, Vincent received another call, this time from the director himself. Washington, the voice said, grave and low. We've got a problem. A leak in your task force. Sensitive files. Internal betrayal. Vincent's chest tightened. Who? There was a pause. Evidence points to someone on your original team. Someone you vouched for. He froze. Marcus Reed, his second in command. A man he'd trained, trusted, almost a brother. The betrayal cut deep. But what hurt more was what came next. You need to handle this quietly, the director said. If the Bureau finds out, it'll be another scandal. Clean it up, Vincent. Off the record. Vincent's pulse thudded in his ears. Off the record. That's how it always starts. He hung up without answering. That night, he couldn't sleep. He drove to his mother's house again, headlights sweeping across her familiar porch. Dorothy was waiting as if she'd known he was coming. Someone hurt you again, she said softly. He nodded. Someone I trusted. They want me to cover it up. And will you? Vincent's jaw set. No, Dorothy smiled sadly. Then it'll hurt a little longer. But you'll heal right. The next morning, Vincent walked into headquarters and handed the director his resignation letter. I can't lead what I can't trust, he said. The director stared at him. You're throwing away everything, Vincent shook his head. I'm keeping the only thing that matters. He walked out without looking back. And for the first time in years, he felt free. News spread fast. Reporters tried to spin his resignation into scandal, but the public didn't buy it. People knew Vincent Washington. They'd seen what kind of man he was, molded by a woman who refused to bow to hate. Dorothy's phone rang nonstop for days. Journalists wanted interviews. Churches wanted her to speak. She said yes to none of them. Instead, she sat on her porch, knitting another scarf. I don't need cameras, she told her neighbor. Truth travels just fine on its own. Late one night, Vincent stood beside his mother on that same porch. The city lights flickered in the distance, faint but constant. What will you do now? She asked. He smiled quietly. What you taught me, Ma. Keep people honest, just from a different seat. And what seat is that? Vincent looked out at the stars. One where I answer to my conscience, not my title. Dorothy reached over, resting a gentle hand on his. That's my boy. The storm didn't announce itself this time. It crept in, quiet, deliberate. like a lie whispered into the right ear. 3 weeks after Vincent's resignation, the first headline appeared: former federal director under investigation. Corruption. Cover-ups, bribery. By noon, his photo was everywhere. Evening news anchors spoke his name with feigned sympathy. Talk shows dissected his character. Old friends didn't answer calls. It was a masterstroke. Calculated, timed, merciless. The kind of move Sterling's allies would have admired. Vincent sat alone in his apartment, TV flickering against the wall. Every detail in the story was fabricated, but perfectly believable. Someone had been preparing this for months, waiting for him to step out of the system's protection. He turned the volume off. Silence fell heavy. Then came the knock on the door. When he opened it, Agent Rossi stood there, grim. "They're not just after your name," Rossi said. "They're coming for your mother." At that exact hour, Dorothy Washington was at her church, helping the community pantry sort donations when she noticed 2 black SUVs parked across the street. Not the kind that belonged in her neighborhood. She felt the weight of their gaze, the quiet menace of people who didn't need to speak to be threatening. She didn't flinch. Dorothy excused herself, walked calmly across the street, and knocked on the tinted window of the first SUV. The glass rolled down an inch. A man's voice said, "Can we help you, ma'am?" Dorothy leaned closer. "You can stop hiding behind dark glass like cowards. You want to intimidate someone, you look them in the eye." There was a pause. Then laughter. Cold, amused. "You're braver than your son," the man said. "No," Dorothy replied evenly. "He just learned it from me." She turned and walked back to the church without looking over her shoulder. The SUVs pulled away minutes later. That night, when Vincent arrived, he found his mother waiting on the porch, calm, composed, knitting in her lap. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "Pacing. I shouldn't have raised a man who lets fear win." "Either," she replied softly. He stopped. The truth in her words silenced the storm inside him. By morning, Rossi had tracked the origin of the smear campaign. A PR firm in D.C., a shell company, offshore funding. But the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. Someone inside the bureau was feeding the story. Vincent recognized the name when it surfaced. Marcus Reed. The betrayal was complete. Rossi looked up from the file. "You want to press charges?" Vincent's voice was quiet but steady. "No, I want him to tell the truth himself." Rossi frowned. "That's not how these guys work." Vincent's eyes hardened. "Then we make him." That night, Vincent met Marcus in a parking structure downtown, the same one they'd used years ago for confidential operations. Marcus looked nervous, almost regretful. "You shouldn't have called me here." Vincent stepped into the dim light. "You sold me out," Marcus swallowed. "It wasn't like that." "They had leverage. They threatened my family. So you traded mine." Marcus's silence was an answer. Vincent took a step closer. "Do you know what you started?" "They're watching my mother now. I didn't—" "Yes, you did." For a moment, all Vincent wanted was to hit him, to make him feel what betrayal feels like when it carries your mother's name. But he didn't. He took out a recorder and set it on the hood of Marcus's car. "Talk," Vincent said. "Say their names." Marcus hesitated, then began to speak. Every word was fuel. Names, dates, transactions. The entire conspiracy laid bare. When he finished, Vincent stopped the recording and turned away. "Vincent," Marcus called after him. "What are you going to do with that?" Vincent didn't look back. "End it." The next morning, the world woke up to chaos. An anonymous email had reached every major news network in the country. Attached was an audio file, the recording from the parking lot. The truth was undeniable. The smear campaign, the shell companies, the political manipulation, every thread led to a familiar name: Daniel Merrick. The same man who'd offered Vincent the Senate seat. Within hours, Merrick resigned under health concerns. Investigations were announced. Arrests followed, and for the second time in 1 year, Vincent Washington's name cleared the rot out of a system that had forgotten shame, but truth comes with a cost. When Vincent drove home that night, he found his apartment ransacked. Files missing, Personal photos shredded. A single message spray-painted on the wall. You won't get a third chance. He didn't report it. He didn't need to. Instead, he packed what mattered and drove straight to his mother's house. Dorothy opened the door before he could knock. "You're staying," she said simply. Vincent nodded. "Just until it's over?" Dorothy smiled faintly. "Sweetheart, men like that don't end. They just get replaced." Days turned into weeks. The noise began to fade again. The Merrick scandal consumed Washington. Vincent declined interviews. Dorothy declined fame. They simply lived, quietly, intentionally, together. Then one morning, as dawn lit the lace curtains in Dorothy's kitchen, the phone rang. Vincent answered. A calm voice on the other end said, "Mr. Washington, the Attorney General would like to speak with you personally." He met his mother's eyes. She was smiling. That same knowing smile she wore when everything felt uncertain. "Maybe," she said softly. "The sun's finally ready to rise." Morning broke softer than usual that day, the kind of morning that felt earned, like the world itself had been holding its breath and was finally ready to exhale. When Vincent arrived at the Justice Department, the marble halls felt different this time, less imposing, more human. He was ushered into a private conference room, where the Attorney General, Evelyn Rhodes, greeted him with quiet respect. "Mr. Washington," she said, extending her hand, "I've reviewed the files you exposed. The Bureau owes you more than an apology. It owes you restoration." Vincent didn't respond immediately. He'd stopped expecting gratitude from power. Rhodes continued. "The President has approved an independent oversight commission, one you will chair if you accept. It's time to rebuild trust, and no one alive has earned that chance more than you." For the first time in months, Vincent allowed himself a long, steady breath. He nodded. "Not for revenge," he said softly. "For reform, exactly," Rhodes replied. "Let's remind this country what accountability feels like." When Vincent returned home that evening, Dorothy was where she always was, on her porch, rocking chair creaking in rhythm with the late summer air. She looked up as his car pulled into the drive. "Well?" she asked, eyes glinting. "They want me to lead an oversight task force," Vincent said, smiling faintly. "Clean up the mess," Dorothy chuckled. "You've been cleaning messes your whole life, baby. At least now they're paying you for it." Vincent laughed for the first time in weeks. "It's not about the pay." "I know," she said. "It's about the promise." Word spread, quietly at first, then publicly. The same diner that once buzzed with whispers of that terrible morning now became the setting for something different. A small crowd gathered one afternoon. A news crew set up. The mayor, a modest man with shaking hands, took the microphone. "Mrs. Washington," he began, "on behalf of this town, we want to apologize and honor you." Behind him, workers unveiled a bronze plaque affixed to the diner's outer wall, in honor of Dr. Dorothy Washington, educator, advocate, mother. Her dignity reminded us that respect is not given, it's earned by grace. The crowd clapped. Dorothy stood, humbled but composed. She didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any sermon. Vincent stood a few feet away, watching his mother receive what the world had long owed her, respect without pity. In a quiet courtroom 2 states away, Richard Sterling sat across from a federal judge. Gone was the expensive suit, the arrogance, the polished charm. What remained was a man hollowed by his own choices. The judge read out the charges: fraud, coercion, assault, obstruction. Each one fell like a nail on a coffin. When asked if he wished to speak before sentencing, Sterling rose slowly. "I thought power meant being untouchable," he said, voice trembling. "But the day I hit that woman, I learned the difference between fear and respect. One's taken, the other's earned." His words hung heavy. The courtroom fell silent. Outside, no cameras waited. No crowd cared. History had already moved on, written by the people he underestimated. Weeks later, Dorothy's garden bloomed brighter than ever. The roses she tended every morning carried the scent of peace, that rare kind earned through pain, patience, and purpose. Vincent joined her, watering the tulips. "You ever think about him?" Vincent asked quietly. "Sterling?" Dorothy replied. "Sometimes. Mostly when I pray." Vincent frowned. "You pray for him." She smiled. "Forgiveness isn't for him, sweetheart. It's for me. Hate takes up space joy could use." Vincent looked at her, truly looked, and understood why she never broke. Her strength didn't come from fighting back. It came from knowing who she was before anyone tried to define her. A month later, Vincent stood before the Senate Oversight Committee, cameras flashing, reporters murmuring. He adjusted the microphone, scanning the room. For once, no nerves, only clarity. "When I started this journey," he began, "I believed justice was about punishment. But my mother taught me something different, that real justice restores what arrogance tried to destroy: dignity, trust, and truth." He paused, the silence thick but respectful. "We can't rewrite the past," he continued, "but we can make sure the next person who walks into a diner or a courtroom is seen for who they are, not what someone assumes they're worth." Applause followed. Quiet, genuine, earned. Back home, the days grew slower again. The porch became their sanctuary, coffee steaming between them, laughter returning like an old song. Dorothy looked out at the horizon, the sunrise spilling gold through the trees. "You did good, Vincent," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No, Ma, we did." For a long moment they sat in peaceful silence, letting the light fill the space between them, the same light that had always been there, even when the world turned dark. If this story reminded you that real power doesn't come from titles, it comes from truth, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story where justice finally catches up. Have you ever seen someone underestimated just because of their skin, their age, or where they came from? Tell us your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire our next viral tale of courage, dignity, and redemption. And here's a little challenge for the sharp-eyed viewers. There's a moment around minute 7:18 when Dorothy quietly adjusts the lace handkerchief in her lap. Before anyone realizes what's about to happen, watch closely, and you'll notice what she's really doing with her phone right then, because in this diner, the smallest gesture exposed the biggest lie.